this time, we'll get the recording even a little bit better than last time. So why don't I'd like to go around the room and have you introduce yourself, because in the last one, in the quarries, there are going to be voices, but now what I'll have to do is go in and put who the people are, talking. So I'd like to go around the room. Jim says that sometimes people are uncomfortable about that. And if you are uncomfortable, you can just, get up or move out of the side of the camera. Okay? Okay, let's start with you, Jane.
Okay. Jane O'Malley. Like you said, my mother was Betty Donovan O'Malley, is Betty Donovan O'Malley. And she's a Corkity. Her mother was Ida Corkity. She was on Norseman Ave. But Ida Corkity's family, and Nikki Corkity, who you probably all know, her family too, they had a farm in Bayview, and it was up, I don't think it was Denison, but it was just before, maybe Donna, before where you lived, up there in the woods. But I've always heard a lot of stories, so I was hoping that someone might have some information on it. Also, got a phone number so that my mother can contribute her stories to it, to add to your farm collection. So that's all I really have to add. If anyone knows any information about it, I'd love to hear about it. Thank you.
And thank you for being a link to your mom. She was a little hesitant when I asked her about an interview, but now you can be our liaison.
Yeah.
And you already are,
yeah,
because she is going to make contact.
Shy or that format or whatever, but yeah.
Okay, good. Thanks so much.
Actually, what would be good, I can get in touch with you if you have a core list of questions. Like if you were going to interview her, I could do that and send that information to you.
Okay.
And if you had to follow up on anything else, and Nikki might as well. I could ask her. She may have some information.
Okay. Jean?
My name is Jean Ackerberry. I said I'm just a guest here. My husband is the Finnish person with all the information. I'm just along for the ride. Thank you very much.
Jean, you may not know, but Edwin paid for a membership for you. Cape Ann Finns is open to everyone.
I am 2% Finnish, I found out.
You don't have to be Finnish.
No, on my DNA, I am 2%, but I didn't ever capitalize on that.
Elena?
Oh, Elena Fishwood Drink, and I'm a Lanesville. Then all of my grandparents were born in Finland, and the family had been in Lanesville since the early 1900s. And member of the Cape Ann Finns and St. Paul Lutheran Church forever in Lanesville.
Yeah.
And thank you for all you've done that.
And there certainly remains a Bistema presence here on the Cape, for sure. Donna?
My name is Donna Kylan and Shea. I'm a Finn from Lanesville and belong to the church in Cape Ann Finns, and I'm happy to have so many of my Finn friends still around. And I'm happy to be here today, and I look forward to these lectures about the farms.
Raymond?
Hi, Ray Hilden, and I am a Lanesville Finn. And I don't know of anybody in my family who was a farmer, but we grew up on Nickel Lane Way, and I was told by Simon Nicola that her father had farmed there. On all of Nickel Lane Way was pasture, and they used to take their cows up to the top of Buckland Avenue, and they free roamed there. And I once had a picture of her father with a staff herding the cows up the hill, but I'm not sure. But as so many people say, I'm not sure what happened to that.
You're on a search mission now. Wally?
My name is Walter McGrath. My mother was Evelyn Denny, and I'm from Lanesville, born in Rockport, 1933, before the pogroms.
I'm Betty Keelan Urkula, and I grew up in Pigeon Cove. My father, Matt Keelan, was born in Pigeon Cove, 1913. My mother was Rachel Jacobson, born in Lanesville, also in 1913. I know nothing about the dairy farm, so I am very eager to learn quite a bit today, and I'm sure I will.
Hi, I'm John Urkela from Lanesville also. My dad was a Finn. His parents came over from the old country, but my mother was a Yankee.
I'm Jane Keelan and I, Betty's sister, and of course my father was born in Rockport or Pigeon Cove, and my mother in Lanesville, and I live in Rockport.
Thank you. Mary?
Oh, my name's Mary Johnson. My mother was a Finnish woman from Rockport. Her name was, well, it was really Lilia Parkio, but the school system changed it to Lydia. But yeah, so her family had a farm in off of Row Avenue, and my grandfather had cows in that stone barn that somebody now has built a house in. So I have some pictures of my grandmother at the bottom of Pigeon Hill with, you know, the cows, because there wasn't any development up there at that time. But anyway, yeah, so I grew up in Bayview, so. But anyway, yeah.
Thank you. Val?
Yeah, my name is Valerie Nelson. So my mother's parents both came from Finland and they settled in Norwood, south of Boston. And they used to come to Lanesville for summer vacations. And then my grandmother decided to buy a property here to retire by the sea. And the family lore is that this house, which I am still in, sits on the Mulu dairy farm, which I'm hearing might not have been theirs, it might have been Mandala or whatever. So that's, I've always been curious about the stone wall and what was going on with that. So.
Okay, Steve?
Yeah, my name's Steve Linda. I'm from Situate. And my dad's side of the family is Finnish, from Quincy and Alston, Brighton, and I think Maynard as well. My connection to this area is my dad's aunt, Esther Kaialainen, had a home here, and then her daughter Ruth and son-in-law Wilbert Tormola was a minister at the local church here. I think so many people knew them. So that's sort of my connection here. Just interested in the Finnish heritage in the whole area.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Steve. Edwin?
Nancy.
Oh, Nancy.
Oh, well, my name is Nancy Klingel, Natty McKay. I live in Lanesville, and I am going to do a presentation, so I don't have to tell you more information about myself at the present time, I guess, because it'll come out in my presentation. But I am a proud Finn and proud Lanesville resident. Thank you.
My name is Edwin Erickson. I lived in Lanesville, but then I moved to Riverdale, New Hampshire, and then back to Gloucester. I'm going to talk about the Nicola farm. I have a picture here. These are the Seppala cows. And you'll notice there's Folly Bay here. Now, the Nicola's farm had, I think it was 5 cows, a horse, a mule, and hens. Edwin Nicola, George Gofel, and myself drove those cows from, when they call it Nicola Way now, but it didn't have a name then, and up Langsford Street, down to Folly Cove, where you saw the water here. Now the Seppala cows, they went a little farther, past the Pigeon Cove line. There was a big grassy field there. They're houses now, but there was a grassy field. That's where they were grazed. But Nicola's cows, right here, turned right, went up that road. There was several summer homes, and we went quite a ways up there to a field where they grazed, most likely owned by Nicola. When we got through chasing the cow, well, I don't say chasing, we followed them. They had a belt, they knew where they were going. So when we got there, up to the field, we then took a beeline through the trees to Woodbury Street down to, what's it called? I forgot it. What's the name of it? Huh?
Granite, Washington,
Woodbury Street down to,
Granite or Washington Street?
no,
Woodbury Street?
what they call that area.
Oh, Folly Cove.
No.
Oh, well, I'm sorry.
Well, it don't make any difference. At the end of Woodbury Street,
Yeah.
Mason Square.
There you go.
Oh, Mason.
And the postal driver used to drop mail there. Well, he used to wait for us as we come running down the hill, and the three of us would get in that mail truck and get a ride to Rancher's Market.
Eliminate some walking.
And I'll mention that when we were, after the summer, no, during the summer we drove, and we always got a quart of milk for taking the cows. But at the end of the season, we'd get a pair of shoes, nice shoes, black, shiny, beautiful. Otto Bent, he was related to the Nicholas, had a store up front, and he sold shoes. But the one thing about these shoes, they were fine if you wore them in beautiful weather. But if it rained, the soles were made of pressed cardboard. But they were nice shoes, can't complain at that time. So that's my story on the Nicholas farm.
How old were you when you did this hurdle?
The one thing about when we got the shoes out of Ben, we call him R2, it was R2 in Finn, but R2 Ben, it sounds like a T, but it's a T. Well, he sold shoes, but that was a store where all the old Finns used to congregate, chew Copenhagen snuff, smoke cigarettes. You couldn't hardly see anything in there. So
That was the building.
that's why they call that the Nassutori. Copenhagen is a snuff. So we call it Nassutori. But in Finnish, at that time too, Finn English came into it. We didn't use all Finnish words. We knew some Finnish words, and others were made up. Because my brothers, my two brothers, Zeno and Wayno, myself, would be at the kitchen table with Mother, and we'd be talking away, and then I'd say, wait a minute, I think we said one Finnish word. And we thought we were going to be talking in Finnish.
Yeah, isn't that funny? That's great. Thanks, Edwin. Now
we'll
this,
go from there.
Nassutori, was that right on the left side of Nickel Lane Way?
That's right. That's now was then the Hilden and property.
Right, Raymond over
So
there.
that's where the store,
Yeah.
that's where the store was, then right there.
That's right there with the Hilden in.
Right. And I also heard that the men, who maybe not all the men, but some of the men were quarry workers, and they were the ones who were the union people.
Well, they were mostly all quality.
And they would talk about union strategies. Did you hear that?
I don't know what they talk about.
Oh, okay.
I have no idea.
Sounds like a man cave in the old days.
But Robert, one of them,
Yeah.
it was mentioned that, remember Elena, that there was one fellow, and I just have a vague memory, he owned a shoe store, that he was a communist. And so is this the same person?
Downtown, no.
Uno Santi.
Uno Santi, that was downtown Lanesville.
Right.
So there were two shoes?
Downtown Lanesville, next to the Cove Cafe.
Okay,
Yep,
all right, yeah, okay.
Also, Lanesville Street has a gas station also. It's in our Brook Village. So it is amazing.
That's right, and that's what Edwin's talking about too. There was a building there, and but there was always the question: was there a gas pump? And I said yes, and you have it in a photo. That's
There's a picture of my dad standing between them.
Yeah.
Can you ask Rob how old they were?
Yeah.
This is so
Edwin,
interesting.
how old were you when you did the walk the cows to pasture?
Oh, I said between 8 and 10.
Yeah, youngsters. Big job.
Yeah. Did the cows know pretty much what to do?
They all knew more than we did. The field, there was a field, and we just brought them there. Well, the lead cow and the bell.
Yeah.
And the lead cow always knows what she's going. And the other cows follow it, and we go along too. But we got paid for it. I don't know.
You bought a milk.
Good deal.
Yeah. I assume that was raw milk?
Always raw milk.
Right. Mm-hmm. Okay, I did, okay.
I'd love to make a comment on this, since it relates to where I grew up. And that is how important it is, the work that we're all doing here. Because as Robin and others have said, pretty soon these memories will be gone. I live in the property he's talking about. I grew up there. Simon Nicola told me about the farm and the cows, but she never once mentioned that that my family lived, you know, at a home where perhaps my great-grandfather had lived. And my father never ever mentioned that he was now living in a house that was once, you know, his great-grandfather's. You know, and to my mind, you would think that they would mention that, but they never did. And so, pretty soon these memories are going to be lost. Now, I did hear that there was a Hilden store further down near what is now Ship's Bell Shore, but I never heard that there was a Hilden store on Nickel Lane Way. And so, that's fascinating.
Do you remember anything like that at Hilden, not where Hilden's was in the village, but was there a Hilden's grocery or small store on Langsford Street ever? Do you remember?
Not on Langsford.
Oh, okay.
It was just Rancher's Market, well, it was a Peterson's to begin with.
Right.
And then Eagle Rancher, then Abe Rancher.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was the Nationwide, which was on, what is that street? Andrew Street, most likely. And then there was the Hilden store.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only things I remember.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I had a chance to talk with, over the phone with Natalie Anthony. Her maiden name was Natalie Nicola. And a lot of what Edward says, of course, she's corroborating. They had chickens, they kept a garden, a mule, cows, sheep, and they did have milk. They milked the cows and they gave it to the neighbors. And sometimes the neighbors would come to their house on Nickel Lane Way, and there was a bottle there, an empty milk bottle, and they'd put the money and then take a quart of milk. And the woman who managed all that was her grandmother, Rita Nicola. Rita, you remember Rita? Yeah. And so she managed all of that. And then the milk was also delivered to several homes on Norseman Avenue. And that included, let's see, the Swansons lived there. Do you remember Swanson on Nickel Lane, on Norseman Avenue?
No, Viking Street.
Viking Street, okay.
Emil Niemi lived on Viking Street.
That's correct. Yeah. And the Phil Felts lived on Norseman Avenue. The Donovans, they would, and they dropped milk there. And then Andy Jacobson's mom and dad, her name was Matilda Jacobson. So I'm sure that there are a lot more that Natalie could say, but she gave us a taste of the idea of delivering milk and people going to get milk as well. There was a shed there for farm tools, and the boys, maybe it was Toivo and, who else might have gone? But anyway, Toivo, they took the cows to pasture, and she called it Blueberry Hill in Pigeon Cove.
We call it sheep pasture.
Okay, sheep pasture or Blueberry Hill. Okay, and it was her brother Edwin who did that. And then on occasion, the cousin, Alvin Jacobson, who is Andy and his wife's son, Muriel's uncle. Rita, part of our talk today is say, well, how about the women? What were they doing during these times? Rita, of course, she made nisu and a lot of baked goods. She womaned the garden, and manage the sauna, all that prep, and of course giving people coffee and nizu and that kind of thing. Not necessarily stoking the fires. And she recounts that Lily Corpy, let's see, I don't know who she is. Lily Corpy had to be connected to the Nicola. Lily Corpy. Yeah. Yeah, I think from around High Street. Well, anyway, the mule got away. And because she was the one that let the mule go out, she had to scamper all over Lanesville to get that darn mule back to the barn. There were sheds, a sauna, there was a building for a loom, and of course 2 barns for the livestock. And then she just added this as anecdotally that during World War II, they were the local citizens who patrolled near the ocean on the shore. And so we'll leave it to, I think it was Natalie, who left one of the shades up at night. And of course, you know how everyone I met took that so seriously. I mean, we're talking about the enemy possibilities. And so there was a guy who came from the shore and said, pull down the shade. We can see you all over the place.
Poland was the warden in our area, and I had Cogswell Road to cover.
Oh, you did?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
So I covered Cogswell Road, and that ain't dark down that road. You can't see a foot in front of you.
That's right.
At night.
Yeah. Do you remember who else might have been doing that work?
I don't.
No, okay.
I know I worked for Poland, and he did some work, but I don't remember.
You mean Lester Poland on Washington Street?
Washington Street, right.
Okay.
My father, Laurie Natty, actually did some work. I thought it was at Halva Point in the tower there. He would have gone into the military, but he had flat feet or something, so it was considered 4F. But I know he volunteered.
Right.
And I think it was at the, like I said, at Halva Point area.
Right from that watchtower.
From the watchtower, right.
That is the museum now at Halva Point.
Right.
Was there anything, Edwin, that you remember that there was a need for all this patrolling, other than everyone wanted to play a part?
Well, no.
There were no subs or anything?
No.
Yeah.
Edwin, you left out one animal.
Oh.
What?
You left out an animal at the Nicola farm.
I did not.
So,
Uh-oh.
They might have had a kitty, I don't know.
Those were working cats in those days. They were the mousers, right?
Did you hear that, Rob? It was a white horse.
What's that?
They were white horse.
Oh, okay.
Right now,
My grandmother always said that was good
Brain
luck
fog.
when you saw it.
Right now, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, very full.
Yeah. Yeah, she said a white horse.
Okay, so I'll hand this around.
Yeah.
And what you can't see, but this gray house used to be the Nicola homestead. And all of, up in front of the house towards Langsford Street, this is Nicolane Way, it was all open field. And right down, you could see a little bit of the ocean, all the way to the ocean, all open. I remember some trees there, but nothing like this. And Nancy lives right there. Now, was that Nicola Lane?
Well, yeah, when I moved to Nicolane Way in 1967, where I still live, and I am next door to Raymond, we're on the left-hand side. My house is the second house down, and on that side, there was all open fields all the way down to the bottom of the hill. There was one house right at the bottom of the hill when we first moved down there. Of course, this house was there, but then it was built up more.
Sure.
Actually, the property next to me was owned by the Jacobson and Andrea Anderson.
Andrea owned the
Yeah, Andrea.
one spot there.
Yeah, because Andrea Jacobson Anderson and her family used to come down there in the summers. They lived in Downers Grove, Illinois, and they used to come down in the summers and camp out on that field. It was all open field. They used to camp out there in the summers. And I'm sure they traded at Ranta's where
I
Edwin,
remember that.
yeah,
The little daughter they had probably must have been 4 years old.
yeah, yeah.
Speaking Finnish. Oh, my God, I'm telling you, that was nothing like that.
And they had a son.
Taught her kids Finnish.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, and Andrea had, yeah, this is Muriel Anderson's family, the musician, and then there was a son, my son's age, his name was Olin, and they used to always come up and, you know, hang out in my yard and run around the field and stuff, so I remember them, yeah. But it was really nice though, it's like children had access to all that,
Right.
that field growing up.
And yes, and when I was very young, there were farming artifacts all over that pasture area. There were like wheels to wagons, there were axles, there were whips. There was one shed there that had these artifacts. You know, and too bad they weren't saved. I remember very young, like in the early 50s, that material was still there.
Right.
And there was an old foundation in their field too, which I'm assuming maybe have been a barn, I don't know.
Yes, there were actually 3 foundations.
Okay,
Yeah.
because that foundation, I believe, is still there.
One
Yes.
day,
Yeah.
Nicholas did have a cat. It was a Siamese cat, I remember it. I used to go after milk, and when I get my milk, the cat would always be going in the oven. But luckily, this was summertime. I hope they didn't let him go in the wintertime. But they did have a Siamese cat.
And they did have a Siamese cat when I was young, so that's interesting.
Okay, yes, Jane.
I just wanted to add, I think my mother could probably contribute some information about that farm because it was in back of her house on Norseman, because I know she can rattle off the names of the cows that were back there. But also quickly to add to your story about the subs, Ida Corkety was brought in for questioning for a few days by the FBI to determine if she saw any subs or anything, and also to determine if she was a spy.
Ooh.
Yeah, because there were people who were, you know, sympathetic to the Germans in that area, you know. So first, actually, a car, she told me she could tell it better, but a car pulled up with these well-dressed men and asking her questions about what she sees out in the ocean, because it's opposite the Portsmouth naval place. And then they left, and then another car comes, you know, I don't know, within a day or something, and well-dressed men, and they were in fact the FBI. The other guys were fake. Yeah. So they brought my grandmother in for questioning. And she was innocent, but yeah, it was strange.
Ida Corkety Dunham.
Yeah. But I'll ask my mother about the farm and back. She might be, I'm sure she could contribute some information.
Yeah.
Anyone else have observations? Sometimes you don't say it right away. It slips.
Has Nancy come?
No, she hasn't begun yet.
I haven't started, Valerie, those are just my few comments.
No, because I just have about the.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But I'll wait for you.
Right.
How
Okay.
was I go?
Thank you, Edwin. Thank you so much. And jump in whenever you have, you know, that first-hand information, you know, about.
Coleman, up 95, I'll remember something.
Yeah, well, you know,
Good for you.
You know the Claymore family. That's obviously you know the Claymore family, my mother's family.
I know where we're going.
Yeah, because that's what I'm going to talk about. So you might have
Right.
input.
I'll see if it's the truth, huh?
Yeah.
Before Nancy begins, it's good to clarify when we say farm, we're not talking about Hood Milk Farm caliber. It seems to be that the Finns called a farm if they had some chickens and maybe a cow, some sheep. It was a farm. And so we might call it just a family operation, but they just called them the farm. We're going to go back to the farm. And a friend of mine from Worcester said the same thing. His grandparents lived out in the country, and his parents would always say, "We're going to the farm," and he'd always look around and he'd say, where's the farm? I don't see it, because we have in mind a farm. And he just, it was cows, chickens, and a garden, things like that. Okay, with that said, Nancy?
Okay, let's see, I better put my glasses on. Well, I already said where I lived on Nickel Lane Way. I wasn't going to mention that, but that kind of played into the whole thing. Well, anyway, I announced already, my name is Nancy Claymore and Natty McKay. All my grandparents were Finnish immigrants. Today I'm going to talk about the Claymore family and their farm, which was on Lever Street in Lanesville. And my mother was Elsie Claymore Natty, one of 11 children born to Gabriel and Selma Galenke Claymore. Selma and Gabriel both came to Lanesville in 1899 at age 18 and 19. And they met in Lanesville through Gabriel's sister, Amanda, who had met my grandmother previously and said, my brother is coming over, I think you'll probably like him, which apparently she did. Because then they married in 1900 and they lived in 2 rooms at 1088 Washington Street for about 3 years, which was where Maryland's Beauty Nook was and the old post office. I know there's a family that lives there now, but anyway, whatever. So, so in 20 years, yeah, they had 11 children. The first one was born in 1901, and the last one was born in 1921. So going along for 20 years of pregnancies and doing all this other farm work and whatever else, I mean, it's pretty amazing to me. Anyway, so Selma, when she first came here, she worked as a maid for a family, and Gabriel worked at Chief's Quarry for a few years until Dr. Rowley informed him that the dust was damaging his lungs, and he was starting to have trouble with his lungs. So he advised him to stop working in the quarries. So Selma and Gabriel decided to purchase approximately 23 acres on Lever Street to start a dairy farm with a loan from Dr. Rowley, which I know I was always told that they paid back that loan, because Finns usually always pay their bills. And so they bought 14 cows, and they had chickens, and each year they had a pig or two, which they raised for their own, family food, and plus for, supporting the family with food, they had 3 potato gardens, they had vegetable gardens, grapevines, a pear tree, and 3 varieties of apple trees. So when Gabriel first delivered milk, he used a cart to haul the large milk cans and would measure out a quart to pour into the customers' containers. Later, he purchased a horse and wagon for delivery. And my Aunt Selma, who married Perry, who then built a home up on Lever Street, also on the Claymore property, she recalled being afraid of the cows, but still her and her sister Isla used to drive them to the pasture each morning and then back to the barn in the evening. Like Edwin was saying about going with the cows. I mean, they were young at the time. And Selma's home was built on land that was the night pasture. And part of a stone wall, which I believe is still there on her property, is one that her father built to keep the cows from roaming. So in conjunction with the farm, they started a bakery across from the homestead on Lever Street, delivering goods to Lanesville, Pigeon Cove, and Rockport. Along with the farm for about a year, Gabriel worked at a lumber camp in New Hampshire, and he stayed up there, that his brother Axel owned. So while he was in New Hampshire, his Selma, his wife, delivered the bakery products by horse and wagon. At this time, she was pregnant with my mother Elsie. This is just a little side note because I thought it was rather humorous. one day, going down Stockholm Ave from Curtis Street, the horse was spooked by something. He bolted down the street. Selma lost the reins and fell out of the wagon into the bushes. The horse continued down the street with sons Ano and Fred, 4 and 6 years old at the time, in the wagon. Luckily, some men from the quarry company store came along in their wagon and stopped the runaway horse. Thankfully, all ended well. So shortly after this episode, Gabriel decided he should come back, and so he came back from New Hampshire. But apparently he did whatever he could to make money, because the milk business wasn't, you know, they weren't making enough money, but they still did it, obviously. So at some point, Gabriel built a blacksmith shop, and he learned blacksmithing trade on his own and worked at that trade. So Gabriel died at age 50 in 1929, and Selma still had 5 children living at home. So Gabriel had just finished adding on a new large kitchen, and Selma was left with $10 in her pocket. So to keep her family going, she made and sold loomed, hooked, and braided rugs on order. She also took in laundry, did house cleaning, and was able to sell stone from the claimable property, which I think one of my uncles, you know, helped cut the stone at the time. And all this with obviously doing everything else with her children and whatever. I'm not sure just when they gave up the dairy farm, but I do recall my mother Elsie, she was the second youngest of the family. She was born in 1918. But I do recall my mother telling me that she had to deliver milk to neighbors before she walked to the Lane School. And of course, all this time, they had no indoor plumbing, bringing up this family and whatever. Yeah, they had no indoor plumbing until 1940. And also, they had no electricity. And my grandfather, Gabriel, was one of the leaders and one of many neighborhood men who were going to meetings at City Hall regarding getting electricity for Leverett Street. So when he died in 1929, the city was just installing poles for electricity on Leverett Street. Selma and Gabriel also, during all this busy lifestyle with no modern conveniences, obviously, were active members of the Finnish Lutheran Church, the Temperance Society, and they were involved in many activities at Wainola Hall. And Selma, my grandmother Selma, passed away at age 73 in 1954. And now the claimable property, there were a couple homes built there, so it ended up then there were 18 acres out of the 23 that now belong to Greenbelt. And it's called the Gabriel and Selma Claimable Reservation, and it starts off, right at the end of Leverett Street, and it goes over to, almost to the tracks, which I call it. Yeah, so anyway, that's my story.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
How about that other pond?
Oh, the little swimming?
Where did that go to?
The little swimming pond?
Yeah, remember the big pit?
Oh, the big pit, that's on Greenbelt, there's Barker's. Barker's Quarry, that's Greenbelt property.
No?
Yep. And then we had a little swimming quarry
Right.
further up, that's where I grew up swimming all the time, that's Greenbelt property.
Gabriel was, he was working in the quarries, but were any of the quarries on his property? Because there's a lot of...
There were, because it was Barker's. Barker's was on his property.
Well, Barker Perry got their water from there.
Yeah, they got the water from there, but I mean, it must have been a working quarry at some time, it was Barker's.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Barker, yeah, way back, but that was he actually worked for the Chiefs, because maybe, I don't know when the water started coming in to, because Barker's, my mother and they all swam in this Barker's quarry, which was right on their property.
Right.
Yeah, and then there's all kinds of little motions. Well, John Urkel would know too, because his family lived in that same area. Actually, my cousin Mimi lives there. Unfortunately, the family homestead on Lara Street was sold to, out of the family.
Yeah.
But then the house that my aunt Selma Claymore Perry built it's at 45 Lever Street. Now, one of my cousins actually owns that property.
Yeah, but do they still get the water that bit?
No, now they have,
Coming in.
no, now they have,
Water coming in.
now they have city water. I think in my notes, they didn't get city water until, I think it was 1990 that they finally got city water, because they did get water out of the Barker's Quarry.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
That's, even though it's not about farms, but it's something to know that Lanesville area was just, you didn't have to dig too deep, and it was granite.
right,
And so the gas pipes came all the way from Texas and stopped in Bayview, I think, because of the granite. The granite is just
Right.
so much granite,
right,
which is,
right.
and that's why even with the electricity, they
Right.
can put that above ground.
Oh, right,
But,
right, yeah.
Lanes-
Yeah, I remember a well, I have to butt in, so I'll forget. I remember a well in my grandmother Claymore's yard, seeing this well, and then on the way, walking up to our little swimming quarry up Lever Street, there was a well, it was like kind of in the woods, and as a kid, I mean, there was still water in the well and it was fresh, and we had a dipper, and I mean, I thought it was so exciting.
Yeah.
Here, this was the water,
Yeah.
basically, years ago, but I thought it was so exciting, putting the little dipper in and getting a drink of water out of there. Wow, I thought that was so unique, and it was like
Is
wonderful.
that property about
Peterson's?
Stenberg's?
I'm not
I
sure,
used to go Stenberg's right behind the Barker's pit and up there.
right,
going
right,
up.
because I'm not
And
sure.
then we got to Stenberg's.
Yeah, because I know going up to Stenberg's, Piston has come in somewhere along there, and I'm not sure, I have a map of the boundary, but I'm not sure exactly, but I know we used to walk up to Stenberg's.
Very close.
Yeah, yeah,
Are
yeah.
there any photos of the place when it was a farm?
I unfortunately don't have any photos.
Yeah.
I don't know if, I got some of this information from my aunt Mimi. A lot of the information I just gave you was from a story that my mother's youngest sister, Mimi, Esther Miriam was her given name. She actually wrote a history in, I think it was 1990.
Mhm.
So that's where I got a lot of this information, because I did have limited information.
Was there any, did you have a notion of where the gardens were and where, oh, I know, let's talk this way. What were some of the outbuildings? You know, there was the home, but every Finn seemed to have a gazillion outbuildings.
Right, yeah, because I can remember the blacksmith shop. As a kid going up there, well, I was born in 1942, so as a kid going up there, we spent a lot of time at the Claymore property, at the Claymores. And, because my father died in 51, I was the oldest, I was only 9, so we spent a lot of time with the Claymores. And anyway, I can picture these 3 different, I have to close my eyes to concentrate, but these 3 different outbuildings, and I know one of them was a baker shop. And I'm not sure, I don't remember what the other ones were. And then the barn was up on the hill.
Yeah.
When you first run into the property where the homestead was, there was a barn up on the hill. I can remember the barn. And then over to the, before you went up the hill, that's where the outhouse was.
Yeah.
And I think it was a 2-holer, and I can remember going in there. I mean, they did have indoor plumbing then, at that time, but I mean, we thought it was fascinating just going in to the outhouse. It was like fun, just going in and
Right.
fooling around or whatever. But I do remember some other buildings over there, but just vaguely.
Right.
So unfortunately, I have, the photos I have are, I have a lot of family photos, but they probably start like maybe in the 30s. And so most of my cousins and stuff, I have photos of them and my
Right.
aunts and uncles, so,
Yeah.
yeah.
Any questions? Yeah.
When your grandparents bought that property, was the house
there and the barn there?
See, I'm not sure, I don't know that, I'm not sure of that, because there was nothing,
Because it almost seems like they must have had a dwelling to go to and they bought the
I think they probably did, because they were living at 1088, you know,
Yeah.
Washington Street, and that's my feeling that there was, but I don't have
Yeah,
any
no,
information
yeah.
about that, yeah. But with all those children, I mean, the house, well, like everybody's, I mean, I knew upstairs, there were two, well, halfway decent bedrooms, and then one little small bedroom. And so downstairs, when I read this information about him adding on the kitchen, so there had to be just a tiny little kitchen in there first, and then I know there was, well, when I was growing up, my grandparents' bedroom, living room, dining room, and then also my grandmother, this is going off on farming, but my grandmother had her loom down in the basement, and I can remember going down into the basement and seeing, you know, her working on her loom. And they probably had like root cellars or something like that, where they had gardens that they might have put their vegetables and stuff. But I mean, I don't know that, but.
Well, we had this in the cellar.
Yeah, just in the cellar probably, yeah, in the cellar.
A tray, like a big area with sand
Okay,
and potatoes were in it.
so that's probably what they did too then, it's probably in the cellar.
And then a lot of it was canned.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Right, exactly, yeah, because they did all that, yeah. A lot of work.
Yeah.
I never would have made it through that generation, it was too lazy. I know, they were hard work, they were pretty hard workers.
They did everything.
I know. They did everything, it's amazing.
That's right.
I mean, I feel so proud of what I think we all do, of what our families did, and, you know, as the immigrants coming over here and how hard they work to just survive and bring up their families.
This thing had come from that background that we're so close to it. that
Right.
We feel the same way that
Right.
work and work hard.
Well, that's like I did accounting work, I never did physical labor, but I was always very conscientious and worked hard when I did work. But I mean, I wasn't doing physical labor.
Okay.
I had a question, Nancy. I missed what you said about, I think, your grandmother, Selma, what was her maiden name?
Kalinke, K-A, I always say it wrong, but it was Kalinke.
And that's a Finnish name?
Yeah, with a K. And she came from Ullava, Finland, which is inland. But her little village actually was Kalinke, where she lived. And when I went to Finland in 1995, I actually went to, you know, where she grew up, and have some pictures of, you know, some of the buildings there.
You know, also in those days in Finland too, I think they stopped it in the early 1900s. But like, say for instance, you bought my house and moved there, you would change your name to Johnson. So it's very confusing. But I can't remember that. I remember reading about that, but I don't remember the exact date that, you know, because it must have got really confusing after a while. So who knows what our real
That's right.
ancestors' names are.
For sure. Well, as I just, Donna.
Just one quick question. Nancy, did the Natties on Washington Street have a farm also?
Yes.
They did. Because
Yeah.
I can remember going up with you to play with the bull. There was a bull there.
Okay. See, I remember going into the chicken barns,
Yeah.
and I used to pick, you know, get eggs out of the chicken barn, yeah. And I also.
We used to bring a red napkin with us. Play with the bull.
Oh, okay. Isn't that funny? I don't remember that, but I do
Oh
remember.
my God.
Did the bull ever come after you?
No, but he got agitated in his little, where he was afraid.
See, I remember one time seeing them cut off like a chicken's head or whatever, you know, the slaughter, and the chicken running around with his head cut off. I mean, that's one of my,
Right.
you know, it was such a traumatic thing, I think, for me to see that. Funny, I probably thought it was hysterical, I think, at the time, to see the chicken running around headless, but I mean, I know they did that.
Were there cows there?
You know, I'm not really sure. I know Ellie wrote some stuff about
Right.
and I do have other information at home, but I didn't want to talk about the
Right.
ad, I just did
Yeah.
one side.
Right. We do have information, and this is a wonderful segue into the
Yeah, yeah.
into the Natty Farm.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what? Come join us.
Or would you, Mr. Mack?
Hi. Bob.
Oh,
Yeah. Perfect.
yes.
What can I do for you?
Well, I'm just dropping that off,
Okay.
and you can have that.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, Bob.
Thank you so much.
That's my mother's Finnish costume when she was a singer. Now, I don't know if anybody wants that.
You mean, yeah, you'll add it. This is part of the Finnish singers group she was?
Yes.
Okay, good. Yep. Thank you.
No.
You can join us.
I'll join.
Yeah. So as
See you,
I,
Bob. Good.
so as I was saying, how we are talking today is what happens. Because I don't want to have a button here saying, you're not talking about farms, you're not talking about farms. It doesn't matter, because everything that people are saying matters. And so with that as an introduction, I did talk with Eleanor Natty Fleet, and I did talk with Sandra Sepulveda Jameson. And so that's how our conversations went. So I have to finagle here a little bit about the farms to get to the farm spot, because there are lots of places where we weren't talking farms. You let the dialogue go where it's going. So here, let's see if this works now. This is Ellie Fleet. It's not Ellie Okay.
I'm just showing you this one. I still want this one.
Here we go.
My own song.
In your youth then, you just could go out your backyard and connect to the Natty property and run right up to your grandparents.
Yeah, I mean, that was our playground.
Mm-hmm.
And 80, we call my woo 80 because we didn't like to say woo. Because it sounded like a cow. Just like Friday, we didn't want to say that.
Yeah.
We called me Esau.
Yeah. It's an interesting story. I'm supposed to be talking, you're supposed to be talking, but you said 80. That's exactly what we called our grandmother Sari, 80.
80.
And because we heard our mother saying 80, and so we picked it up.
Yeah.
And so then I remember my mother saying that 80 doesn't mind because she only had one child, her. And so she didn't have a bunch of kids, and so she doesn't mind responding to 80.
So she was 80. 80 was a very busy lady. She took in washing. She ran the farm, I think. I think my grandfather was still working. You know, in the Granny Company.
Mm-hmm. The quarries.
The quarries. He didn't work in the quarries. I think he worked in the office
Mm-hmm.
and took books.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that's what he did. Anyway, so we used to have, okay, so there were two large chicken coops. One was a condo, because it was up and down, and then another one, and then another small one. So we had the two chicken coops, they had 4 cows, they had sheep, they had one horse called Gurley, who they did the gardens.
Oh, the turned over the soil, plowed, yeah. That was a cow or a bull?
Horse.
Oh, a horse, Bully.
Gurley.
Yeah.
And that was Robert's cow. Robert manned the cow, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And what else did they have? Chicken. Well, there was other things working around. They got pigs later. They had a nice sauna.
So,
beautiful farm.
yes. And did you have one cow for the family, to get milk for the family, or did you have more? Did
With
you,
4 cows.
you had 4 cows?
And they didn't pasteurize their milk, so I know my grandmother made cheese. Is it cheese? Butter.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think they sold their milk.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they did. I mean, with a family of 12, we need to sell the milk.
That's what I was thinking, yeah.
They couldn't
Right.
use it all.
Yeah, I'm only guessing, but maybe someone may knock on the door every once in a while, but they weren't actively going out.
Right,
So,
they weren't.
you know, that's how the Finns were. They helped one another that way.
No, the eggs were something else. I mean, they knew they had enough, they did eggs, and they sold eggs. And my memory, of course, was my participation. They showed us how to take the bucket of eggs, wash them, candle them, weigh them, and sort them. Extra large, medium, and put them in different baskets. So we would do that, and then they would go to another room where they were boxed. And then the boys would deliver them. They had regular customers. A lot of people came to the door.
Was there any sign or just word of mouth? Do the natties had eggs?
Just the word of mouth.
Yeah, the natties had eggs to sell.
Yeah. The natty when they were called the natty egg farm, or the natty dairy farm, because we went dairy. Yeah, it was word of mouth, because it wasn't a big farm, but it made enough money. Every one of those boys went to school, college. And
Okay, so now I'll go to the next segment. Ellie, the voice was not strong because it wasn't during the taping, too kind of hoarse. And did he have workers to help, or was all the kids helping?
kids.
Mm-hmm.
Kids did all the work.
Mm-hmm.
I never saw a helper there.
What did they do? You said Robert manned the mule, the horse. What else would?
Well, I mean, there was the eggs, picking the egg, and delivering the eggs. You know, and I guess there was plenty to do.
Mm-hmm.
I have a picture in the other room of my sister Diana. No, it wasn't. She's not in that picture. But Felix Bosch, the painter, do you know him?
No.
He lived down in his cove. He painted the haystacks. They used to make the haystacks.
Mm-hmm.
They were beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I guess the boys and their games.
Mm-hmm. Now tell me about, you had said some of the jobs, chores that Aggie had, and just assumed in addition to raising so many children. Who kept the summer? Who built the fire?
My grandfather.
Mm-hmm. Was it once a week sauna or twice?
Once a week, Saturday night.
Yeah. Did people come to use the sauna too, or was it just the
I think it
family?
was mostly family.
Mm-hmm.
I know my mother lined us up.
Mm-hmm.
We picked up enough.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know when my mother would go into, she'd be a nurse, she had private duty, and she'd go and she'd say, go stay with the AD. AD's watching over you today.
Mm-hmm.
because she was our babysitter.
Mm-hmm.
Even though we weren't babies, we were,
Okay, so she had a dozen children of her own,
yeah.
and then she served to help with her grandchildren and working with the eggs.
Yeah.
Was there any story that maybe Isette got sick? Then who would take care of the farm? The kids or?
Yeah, I don't know, because he never got sick. My grandmother got sick.
Yeah, yeah. We better say their names because we're calling them Mom, Grandfather. What is your?
What's her name?
What's her real name?
Oh, Matilda, and he was Eric.
Okay.
Eric and Matilda.
All right. So that's maybe why Eric Natty has his name. Eric. Yeah.
Of course, he was Jimmo's
Son.
son.
Yeah, that's right. Let's see. So you did say that the eggs were for sale.
Yeah.
And you just saw them go out the door. Do you have any idea of who might have been on the list to deliver?
No.
No. Okay. They just went out the door.
Right.
Was there a regular pattern? No. It's when they were available.
That's my knowledge. To them there was. I mean, I was just too young. I thought I was only in fourth grade or something.
Mm-hmm.
Just old enough to candle and weigh and clean.
Yeah. And where are you in the Stefani? They had a farm.
Yeah.
And if people kept chickens and maybe a cow, a horse, it was called a farm.
Oh, okay. Well, we had that four cows. I only remember this: Daisy, Blackie, Brownie, and then there was one at the end, and I never liked that cow, so he never got a name.
You named them.
Yeah. It was too far down. And we used to like to milk them. Not seriously, you know. I think one of the cows used to like to kick the bucket, so that wasn't one of my favorite things to do. And we had a lot of opportunities. I remember watching sheep feed on.
Sheep fever?
Delivering babies.
Yeah.
That was funny but interesting.
So there were sheep on the farm too. Were they to be mowed the lawn?
I don't recall. They didn't mow lawns, not with cows.
Right. Okay, let's see. Sepulus had a farm down in Folly Cove. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I remember Sepulus, yeah, but I don't remember what they had in their farm.
They had cows. Okay, let's stop there. So Ellie was able to give us some good information about the Natty farm, and and clearly, again, they had a variety of animals for use for them, their food, a small garden, vegetable garden. But interesting to me was this artist Felix Bosch. Does that name ring a bell to anybody? Felix Bosch.
It does with me.
You do?
My mother had a painting.
Okay, Felix Bosch, an artist.
Felix Bosch?
Oh, yeah, I'm going to do the painter.
Okay, can you talk about him? Do you remember anything? And did he paint scenes from Lanesville, or?
He painted down Lane's Cove most of the time.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And at that time, he was renting a room for my brother on, what's the road they go down? I got brain fog right now.
Dooley?
Dooley Street.
Yeah.
lived there. And then finally he went back to Holland, and Netherlands. He was Dutch.
Okay. That's why, if you heard Ellie, because she was, the volume as went up as far as it could. Ellie said that Felix Bosch painted the haystacks in the garden, you know, and she loved them. She thought they were so beautiful. Do any of you recall, you know, from our age group, those haystacks? No. I think I do when I heard her say it, but I don't know if I really did.
I think I do too.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Is there anything else that anyone can add about the Natty farm? No? And I'd like to think most of you know that this was the homestead. And what is the name of the woman who lives right to the right of this house? She's the one that...
Fish.
Yeah, Prudence Fish. She probably, I remember she talked about this as one of the first period homes, this part of the house, in...
Yeah, because it was only this part of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, because at one time it was only this part.
Another thing...
The Natty, the Natty house, I believe it was only one time, just this part, and then they must have put that on.
He has farmed land that was never, ever farmed. He has created vegetables for about 7 summers, very
This was the
strong.
original.
That's what I thought, that's what I thought, that was the original.
And it's around the house, it's not a
That's
big
what I
plot of
Much
land.
later.
Yeah, that's what I
And he
think,
has
yeah.
been able to grow,
This is a whole different
I can make gallons of sauce for the winter time. We eat vegetables over the summer, and they can share it with the neighbors. He's still farming the same way he did on
I haven't
Francis Street.
been up there for so many years.
A lot.
Okay, so we'll pass this around.
Natalie, is she? Yes, she's in Maine.
This is, again, in Lanesville, on Washington Street, just after Button Avenue. I tried to get the addresses down on the back of the page, just so some people with a GPS who might be interested, who don't know where these are. Okay. Now we'll, Sandra Sepala Jameson also contributed. She has a strong voice, so you'll be able to hear every word. And she speaks very clearly. And so here's what she had to say about the Sepala farm. And she provided a lot of photos that I will call photocopy, so I'll just hand these around as she talks. Thanks.
But it stopped short. There was enough that you could actually.
What?
If you needed to, you could drive around it into that back area. And I think sometimes the cows graze back there.
Mm-hmm.
I know I played back there because I've got a couple of pictures of me, you know, in that area. I remember my grandfather used to bring the cows out. There was a little bridge that went over the brook, and he would take them over to Taylor's Field, and that's where they would graze. I thought it was a convenience for both people because Mr. Taylor didn't have to worry about mowing the lawn or anything, and he got fertilizer, and the cows got something to eat. Mm-hmm. That's a great plan. Yeah, and let's see, what else do I remember?
Did your grandfather take the cows to graze anywhere else, or was that ever mentioned?
You know, I'm not sure, except for that picture that David, not David, I get two people, Martin Ray had taken, or where he found that picture with him walking down, and that's definitely coming down from the area of the Balzerinis, because I know there was a story that I was told anyway, that my grandfather wanted to mate his cow with Mr. Balzerini had a bull, and so that they wanted to make some kind of an agreement. And Mr. Balzerini only spoke Italian, and my grandfather only spoke Finnish. So basically, they took the two boys that were of age with them, like teenagers, and they, Mr. Balzerini would talk to his son in Italian, he would talk to my father in English, and my father would talk to my grandfather in Finnish, and they made the deal. And the cow got impregnated. Can you imagine as a teenager having to do something like that? It was kind of interesting.
Oh, I think so. A lot of grown-up responsibilities at a very young age.
Yes, yes. And I noticed that none of the boys that grew up, other than my Uncle Robert, were interested in maintaining the farm. They all went and did something else. They worked for the tool company, or my father went to the Coast Guard, and my Uncle Albert, he went to college. And we all thought that it was the influence of Miss Hale and Miss Clemens, who lived up on the hill, the artists, because they were very interested in sponsoring these kids and getting them into, you know, learning about other things. So
that's a great tidbit of information.
Yes.
You know, that he was encouraged by them.
Yes.
Yeah.
In fact, I wondered sometimes if they hadn't paid a little bit of it as well, but I don't have any proof on that.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Albert must have identified himself as a smart kid.
Yes. And you know who else got involved with them? It's my Uncle Uno. They got him interested in art. And forevermore, he was really interested in artwork. And he had art books. And Hilda tells a story about she and Vera, who were good friends, getting into one of Uno's art books. And they were very artsy, and they had naked women in them. So Vera and Hilda decided that he should cover them up. and they did. And Uno was so furious with them because they had ruined his art book. She told that was another one of those stories she told at Vera's funeral.
Right, isn't that funny? Oh my
So
God.
there are a lot of things that kind of went on down there that kind of were sort of, you know, as I say, interesting.
So there were,
Okay. Let me just listen.
we've seen in the photos you've shown me, there are many outbuildings.
Yes.
So it's wonderful that you have the picture of the barn, because
Yeah.
it was raised very long time ago.
Oh, yes, yes.
And so what other buildings?
Well, let's see, if you went in the long driveway that was on, as you faced the house, it was on the right-hand side. You went down past the house and down into the back, and right on the right-hand side, there was this, what we called a garage, but they had no doors. So I always felt that they must have been for like hay wagons or things like farm equipment. And then there was the sauna right next to it, and my Uncle Albert has an article that he writes about that is really pretty interesting. And then there's there was like a little chicken yard, I think, when I was little, but then that kind of turned into like a vegetable garden. Then there was the milk house, and then the barn came out, and then on the other side, there was I think that somebody said it was a 6-holer. I always thought it was an 8-holer, but because there was no plumbing, except for there was running water in the house, but there was no, you know, bathrooms or toilets or anything. So you had to, you took a sauna when you're dirty, and you went to the outhouse, or as they say in Finnish, husi.
Yeah.
And actually they had 4 doors, and in each one of them, I believe, in one of them, they had a baby seat, so you could bring your child in there too. So then the next building over from that, and it wasn't very far away, was the thing called the Liedeli, and I looked it up in a dictionary one time trying to figure out what it meant, and it just means another form of shed. And Google had a loom in there when I was little. And then later on, many years later, when Uno was still living at home, he converted it into a camp, and I think he lived in it actually for a while, and then they rented it out to summer people. And it turned out that I think one of the people on Dooley Street that lived across the street from Laurie, he lived in there for a winter rental at one point. So anyway, and then as you came out, there was the house. And the house, the way it's situated now, it has a front door, but it never did. It always had two doors on the right-hand side, one for the downstairs and one that went upstairs. And the other side was, it came in on the opposite side, and that had like a little room there that my grandfather used to take off his stuff from the barn and leave it there. But that got taken out after they had converted to bathrooms, because they took part of that room and used it for a downstairs bathroom. And then there was another house that was, as I called it, the Lautadal, that was right on the brook. And that had actually 2 apartments in it. And that's where the Runsells lived for many years. And so that's basically what the property looked like.
Were there enough cows at Sunnyside Farm that your grandfather was able to sell milk to neighbors or wherever?
I didn't know that really, other than that my father told me at one point when he was in school, he used to have to deliver milk to people, but he would take the container, like there was those tin containers, and he would pour it into their container. So he actually, I'm sure they must have paid him for it, but he never mentioned that. He just was, he always thought it was such a pain that he had to do it before going to school.
Sure, yeah. Was there a milk wagon? Did they talk about that? Or?
Nobody ever mentioned that, but I can't imagine him carrying that around Lanesville, because, you know, it's a good height probably.
What about across the street where the Demetriuses lived? Would that must...
Okay, couple of things came to light, and this is actually from Hilda's talk at Vera Settler Olson's funeral. And first thing I noticed was Uno Seppala, Vera Seppala Olson, and I, Hilda, would deliver milk when Uno wanted us to help. So we don't know how that was, you know, and then Sandra's father did delivering too, just that same way. You fill it into the person's container that is presented to you. And another thing that was in this of interest to us today is Hilda says, that's Donna's mother, we had a life of learning and caring, and we got along so well. It was great when we were able to take the cows to pasture and go after them in the afternoon. That was on the low road, Washington Street. When it comes to that V with Langsford Street, it was a pasture on the left. Now it's a swamp. And so anyone who is local can kind of picture that, where we have all that low points and there's reeds and water. At one time that had been a place for pasture. Just as Edwin let us know, unless some of you knew, that going over the Rockport line, there were, before it and then after it, there were pastures back there. And so I think this is all edifying to us in terms of, you know, what we saw in our time growing up and what was really there for a long time.
Yeah. Robert, was the pasture though a little bit further up the hill, like opposite my friend Peter Prybaugh said the pasture was...
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay, is that what you're hearing? Okay.
Well, I just remember growing up, Peter and I went up that way, and he said he understood that he was pastors there, but not in our lifetime.
Right. So I'm amazing behind what we call Swampy. It was probably very open, and that may well have been, yes.
I think I remember my mother saying that it went way up, probably across from the Pine Bluff
Yep.
house, from, the bottom of the low road,
Mm-hmm.
and went up to across from the Pine Bluff.
Yep. Okay, there you
They
go.
did call that Great Fleece Meadow. Great Fleece
Great
Meadow.
Fleece
I still don't hear it.
Great Fleece Meadow.
Grape Leaf Meadow.
G-R-E-S.
Okay, that's good to know. That's really good. We have to, Sandra speaks a little bit more, but we have to go back to, remember we were talking about the Nusi dollar? The Nusi dollar or Nasti dollar?
Or Copeland, the nut store.
Yeah, what was it called? Nusi dollar?
I got the brain fog, I can't.
Okay, okay.
I get that inside, I can go outdoors, wait a few minutes, and I can't do anything. When I'm inside so long,
Yeah,
the brain fog comes, I lose my hearing, and the sight is bad.
yeah. Well, anyway, that building.
Nasu-dori, that's what.
Nasu.
Nasu-dori. I mean, that's what we call it.
Yeah,
And Dori is not a Finnish
right.
word, it's what we use.
Doherty, like,
Nasu is.
it's making an English word Finnish. Yeah, it's making an English word store Finnish, Doherty. Yeah. So anyway, that building where the Nasus Doherty building, and we can, I hope someone can either affirm it or check it out, that building was moved to Washington Street where the Burtons lived, Ross Burton and his wife Hilda Johnson Burton. And that became, I think, maybe the central part of their home because they had many additions over the years. And I kind of remember those back steps when it was the original house and there were no railings or anything, and the door was right there, and you had to open it up, and it was kind of dangerous. And so even that now kind of tells me this could well have been a move from...
When was that been moved?
Whenever they...
Any idea on the year?
No. Would it have been in the 40s? Because it was already there when I was...
in the service in 45, 46.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's when I figured, because I don't remember.
Right.
And I lived right there, I mean, they took a building away,
Yeah.
I should have known it's missing.
It was, yeah, they moved it all the way to Washington Street when they could. Okay, and let's listen a little bit more to Sandra, and then we'll be finished with the recordings.
There anymore. I think they had, kind of gone the way of the baked chicken or something.
Eating it all up.
Yeah. I do remember going down to Daddy's farm though, because I always had to go and get the eggs. And I remember going into the doorway there and having to speak Finnish to them because they didn't speak English. And Mrs. Natty was sitting there candling eggs with a real candle, and I thought, oh my, and I'd have to say, you're right, baby, and, be nice.
Yeah. Isn't that something?
But I never had to go get the chickens, but my grandmother must have done that because they were, when she came home, she had to pluck them, so.
Right, they were, they weren't all
They were fresh.
Yeah, they were certainly fresh, for sure. Let's see. How about, let's see. Did any of your uncles tell you stories that, about the having to work the farm?
I don't know, I don't think so. I remember my father telling a story about he and Durwood Amazine, who had borrowed Durwood's uncle's car and were practicing how to drive it in the driveway between the outside toilet and that barn that I said was like a garage for car things. And they were practicing, you know, shifting and driving ahead and backing up and whatever.
Right.
And they went a little bit too far back and they hit the outside toilet. And it shook it like, oh, and guess what? Pastor Ronka was in there, in the toilet, and he comes running out with his pants around his knees, smoking a cigar. And he smoked. It was a scandal.
Isn't that something? Now, was his name Samuel also?
This is, we get off just as we did here, different story. So Sandra provides us with a good idea in the photos that she lent us to see the farm. And this is what it looks like today. It's at Folly Cove, and there's oftentimes a trend. So several of the farms were on property that went down to the water. You know, they long strips. Your property, Wally, is similar, right? It gets a long strip right to the water, and a lot of land in those days.
Yeah, they went
Okay.
Several went right down to the water, right?
Yeah.
Okay, a little bit now about okay, in Lanesville, there is another farm. It was called the Mantyla, M-A-N-T-Y-L-A farm. And for those of you who, it was off Langston Street, where Cappy Dunn lived. There's a road, it's now called Old Farm Road. It used to be just Langston Street. And it used to be like 8R Langston Street and 10R Langston Street, but they've changed the name. Well, if you go down into that road, the first building is now gray. It used to be with an open front porch, and it used to be brown and with white trim. Now it's gray with white trim. Well, in that home lived Joan Langley. Joan Langley Dow is her married name. And she had a sister, Annette Langley. And she and her folks lived there in her growing up years. And so Joanne, I called her. She lives in West Townsend, Mass. I called her, and she said that her parents had purchased that piece of lot from the Mantylas. They had a lot of land back there. And so Langley's house is here going in, and then the Mantyla farmstead was next to it. I'll pass this around now. This is a picture, it's the modern day picture of the Mantyla farm. And there used to be a semicircle driveway. You could go in where Old Farm Road is, and you could connect to what is now Langsford Way. And Edwin,
Happy down the stone.
There must be a road coming here.
Yeah.
And circle right up.
Right.
Yeah.
That's from back there.
Right.
Yeah.
Did the Mantylas trade with Ranters Market?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you remember anything about the family at all?
No, I can remember they had a son. I think that's the only one. I remember one son.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That's all I remember.
I wonder what the guy's name was. It wasn't Emo Mantyla, was it?
No, that's Mantyla.
Okay.
Yeah, because I don't know anything about that, but I just remember the Mantylas living, some Mantyla that lived on Morgan Avenue. Yeah, right, yeah.
Remember the Mantylas?
Yeah, the Mantylas that lived right behind, on Morgan Avenue, right near the church. That's who I remember living there.
Right.
So
So Rob, that,
Yeah,
They live in one of those houses.
yes, yeah, I don't remember, yeah.
I know exactly that area you're talking
Right.
about, and there was a stone wall abutting them. On the other side was the Mulu farm that I know.
Mm-hmm.
It is not the same.
Yeah. Right, okay. So there are two.
Exactly.
Okay, wow. When I tried to get in touch with Stephen, he wouldn't, didn't respond,
Right,
you know,
right.
and I couldn't quite understand.
In fact, I think I have some of the old deeds where on the other side of that stone wall was a Montala
This is
property.
where the farm pasture used to be, but it's all built up with houses
Oh,
now.
yeah, okay. Yeah, because the Merlot house was right on Langston Street.
Right.
Yeah, I remember the Merlot house,
Right,
yeah.
right.
Where's this one now?
That's
So-
the next house down
It's down
from,
back to the, down and back behind Capri.
towards Lanes Cove is the Mulu property.
Oh,
Right.
Yeah, oh, definitely.
So Joan said that in addition to her family getting a piece of that Mentala property for their own home, she remembers the Mentala farm because she lived right there. And there was a barn, there were cows, horses, pigs, chickens. Their family got the raw milk right from the farm, and eggs as well, cattle. Oh, cattle land. That picture that's coming around that looks like a bunch of houses, well, that was the back behind the Mentala homestead. It was all open pasture right down to the water. And as Joan explained it, the Mentalas maybe owned a little of it, but not quite to the water. But over time, they even purchased that land beyond. And so some of you from the 50s, remember the 50s, there was a Mentala who started to build cottages back there, summer homes, and the simplistic ones, not the McMansions like we see today dotting the coastline. And that's when they owned all that land. We wouldn't really recognize that because so many of us wouldn't have had a reason to go inside of Langsford Street towards the water. And she remembers too that there were 3 saunas and they were public saunas. Did you know that? Mentala's saunas were public saunas?
Oh, there was a lot of saunas.
Public. You mean another?
Yeah, all the public ones.
Okay,
You
good.
know what had one?
Yep.
Okay. Well, you know,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, right there.
Yeah, right on Langston,
Mhm.
yeah,
And put you over
right.
Right. So something else comes to mind going back to the Natties again, and that is I asked Ellie, where is it that the cows went to pasture from the Natty farm? And she believes that they would come out onto McClellan Street and head towards Langsford Street. Remember the Sherbin house? In that, down McClellan, across there, and then go to what had been a field, Christy Bettis Field.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and so now what was built there in the 50s was what we would call real modern homes. Was it some kind of project from Harvard kid or? Yeah. MIT, okay.
Shipsbell Road.
Yeah, and now it's called Shipsbell Road. Well, that was all open,
Yeah.
open fields, and I remember, do you remember there was a single path? A dirt path that wound its way down towards the water.
I remember going down there because my cousin Dinah Stefano,
Yeah.
I mean, she was, Ellie's sister.
Yeah,
And they lived on McClellan.
right.
And we used to cut through Miss Sherman's yard. I mean, she'd let everybody go
Oh, yeah.
through there. She was very nice. But go down through that field and down to the rocks down there
Mhm.
too. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Also were fishing, all open land.
I guess
Yeah.
that's
Then we got to the Conlon house.
I don't know.
And then
Well, over by Shipsbell.
Yeah. Yeah.
Christy Betters, I don't know how to spell that last name. Christy Better, B-E, I don't know, Better? How do you spell that name?
I don't know.
I
Right,
believe it's B-E-T-T.
B-E-T-T?
I've seen it that way.
Okay. What I'm showing you now is a modern day picture of what had been Christy Better's field. It was all open, and then Young's farm used to come and take the hay, you know, when the hay.
Feeling that's all you wanted for a space because it was sandy going on.
So Rob, what both Matt and Glenn Sparkman said is that in the summertime, maybe not all the herds, but the herds were basically, they actually might even own land up in Dodgen. So they were moved for the summer or taken to like Essex. So that, I mean, it's an open question,
Right.
but two of them have said that, including Matt and Ed.
And Edwin said that today. He speculated that the Nicholas owned land up where they took the cows to pasture.
Right, up in Dodgen.
Right.
Yes.
And so in Bayview.
Yes.
Okay.
That would have been summer question. Yeah. Right.
Okay. Now we have still the Ahola farm. And what else? Is that the last one for us to talk about? No? Ahola, we've covered quite a few.
Yes.
And some, you know, I didn't know about Mantilla Farm. Did any of you? Is that common knowledge to you folks? No? Do you remember it at all? Wally?
Ahola Farm?
No, what, Mantilla on
I
Langston.
remember that, they had a summer up behind it.
Yeah. Yeah, okay.
Do you remember the
So
Mulu
it's-
farm? Or Ellie, do you remember?
What's that?
The Mulu farm.
Miley. Miley, M-Y-L-Y.
I don't remember that, but
That was right
I remember
next to
where
it.
Miley lived, and they had a son that makes the walk a hand, I'm not, next to Debbie Dunn, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and they had a son, which is the building still there, right to the right as you're looking down in there.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Excuse me, I lost track of all these houses. This one says number 5 and it's looking down towards Ipswich Bay.
That's Chippewa Road. And that was Cresty Bettis Field. It was all open when.
That was a huge.
Oh, yes, I remember that, but I did not know that.
Right. You know, it's right adjacent to the cemetery there.
Yes.
And where Wygans used to live.
Those houses, when they first built those houses down in Shipsville, I think they were called Techville.
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 Yeah.
I couldn't think of the name, and all of a sudden they came.
And only a couple left.
Right.
Yeah.
They were made by Edgerton, Vermont Housing and Greer. They invented the school light. So when you see a wagon frame down on the movies, and it's kind of going backwards, it's actually the school light that's picking it up.
Mm-hmm.
The son went to Harvard, that's where then he built the places on Circle.
Right.
What I'm saying is, when I was a kid, everybody said, oh my gosh, have you seen those awful?
I know,
Yes.
they were horrible.
Yes.
Well, they were so modern.
They were, I do know that my grandfather did hay on Lane's Point.
On Lane's Point.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yep. That was another place where, well, Valerie would know this, Sunset Point Road, you know, it was all open land, wasn't it, Edwin?
All open.
Yeah. And so lots of places the cows could go that we don't even think about now.
And then they built like little small cottages, it was just little
Where's
small
Lane's Point?
cottages.
You're not talking about Sunset Point, are you?
Well,
Obviously,
Yes.
they became mansions.
Okay,
You're talking
so-
about Sunset Point.
yeah.
Right.
So our last talk is about the Ahola farm, and I had invited Peter Parsons to come, thinking that his connection to the Walkemers, Sylvester Ahola's wife, Sima Walkemer Ahola, he may have had a few more tidbits about that, but I guess we're all going to have to pitch in and say what we know, and Valerie brought a wonderful photo of when it was a working farm, or near to. So could you say a couple of words for
Yeah, I'll
starters?
pass this around. This was a photo that Thaisto Polka took that was in the airport collection. So Les found it. And it shows not just the existing Lanesville Community Center building, but 1, 2, 3, well, maybe 5 others that were in that complex. And for those of you who remember when Professor Alleman came some years ago from Wisconsin, he told us that the combination of buildings, sort of circular shape, was kind of a classic design of a farm barnyard that came over from Finland. It was a real Finnish layout of the building. So this shows what was there I don't know what was there when the community center took it over. You have a memory, Elena, too, of some different sheds.
I just think there was the weaving shed, but I don't know which one it is in that picture.
Yeah, so there was a lot more there. I'll pass that around, but the only other thing I would add about the Ahulas was that someone who got to know Sylvester and Sima some decades ago when they moved here, Susan Hupp and Ted Hogan up in Langsford Street, you must know who they said that Sylvester used to say that, I guess Simon was a little bit younger, but that his job was to deliver the milk in the morning, and that's how he met Sima, and that he used to love to deliver it to her family because that was when he got to hang out with her. So there are all these sort of little stories here and there of the Ahula.
So I think Simon grew up on Northern Avenue, because she was part of that Jacobson.
Oh, it could have been, but in
Yeah,
any case,
he
that
probably delivered.
Sylvester had to deliver
Delivered
in the
more,
morning.
yeah. Yeah.
He delivered to her family.
Right, right,
That's
yeah.
where he spied her
Right, that's
first.
where he found it, yeah.
John, do you remember anything? I know that you lived up in that area, and do you remember anything with more than the barn that we know today?
Yes, I remember seeing those other buildings in this photo here. Plus, on the other side, where the writer center is now, that was a milk house.
Yeah.
I remember that. We used to play in that, and then we needed a Boy Scout hut for a while.
Yeah.
Where is that picture taken from? Like, what direction? Can you?
Sophia. I
It
heard
was,
it's Sophia.
Yeah, Balkans.
So it's
Looking towards High Street.
Sophia Ahulas, Sylvester's mother. I
High
think.
Street is on the
Right.
far side of those buildings.
Kind of history.
Oh, yes, she did. I think we
Yeah,
have it.
You probably have that,
Right,
yeah,
yeah. How about you, Evelyn? Do you remember anything about the Ahulas farm, or was that too far away from Langsford Street?
No, I just know of it, that's all.
That's,
knowing his neighborhood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My district.
that's right.
Yeah, knowing your district, knowing your neighborhood,
It's so
right?
funny.
And we weren't allowed, but as we were younger, we weren't allowed to go everywhere.
Mhm.
I mean, our parents, the other day, we would go to, and that's it.
Right,
And during the time, you had to be home.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, but you didn't go all over Lanesville?
No, not for a long time.
Yeah, until you got older?
I can remember when me and George Philfelt, we were following my brother and Al Philfelt. They were going from my Lanesville home, going to down in the village. So when you come from Andrews Corner and Washington Street, we went past that, we up to Hilton and Store.
Mm-hmm.
They saw us, and they told us that the only thing, we were lucky because which road did we go?
Right.
One was Washington Street,
Right.
the other, and we were just little kids. But we were coming, so luckily we took the right one.
Yeah.
And that was big, otherwise we'd have been walking and
Well, where are we?
Where we are.
Yeah.
We chose the right one. We could have been only 6 years old.
Yeah.
Right.
We just nobody, we just followed him, we got out the yard and followed him down.
That's fun.
So I had a couple of other things to add maybe, Rob, but more general, not just but I did call the Gloucester Archives office on Monday, and I forgot to call them again this week, sorry. But the question was, what city records or census records might there be about these farms? And it's possible that the assessors, when they were trying to value the land and the buildings, they probably, or might well have added in an accounting of the number of animals that were there, so that they had a real sense of the property value. So they will look it up, they just hadn't done it this week. And it's assessors, taxes, and census forms somewhere in there and that would be quite a gold mine because you really get to see, I said 1920, but you could go back to 1910, you could track who owned what and how many animals they had. So that's one thing that could be a real, but others have said, I think this is an incredible thing that you're doing, Rob, here to bring this forward. And the last time we met, it was the word of the cadence of life. I think we're just making light years of progress in understanding our ancestors and the lives that they led. Because going back a few years, so much of the story was around the quarrying and the quarry workers. And then we've looked at music and theater, the sort of cultural life they had, and the literature, Lee King and Natty, and all that stuff. It's sort of culture. And this is like a whole other rich vein of stories and realities that fit in with all this other stuff. Because what's going through my mind is, why did they do this? Was it because they had farms in Finland? Well, they did. Was it because they wanted their own food, which we know they did? I mean, the Finnish cuisine is so heavily butter and cheese. They probably had in their garden with root vegetables. And then they went blueberry. That was all, so they brought with them, a sort of cooking and taste that they could grow themselves. But then there are these stories of survival, when we talked about before, when husbands were dying and you were left with 4 or more kids and a wife, and how is she going to survive? Well, when you look at it, if you at least had food on the table, you didn't have to buy from the company store, for God's sakes, you were a long way to being able to make it through. And so there was this sort of element of just rock bottom livelihood here that they were providing for themselves. And then they bartered and traded, and probably not much money, but then what was the other income from the quarries or the domestic work? I think that Rob and I have talked for a couple of years about leading up into one last element beyond the culture is livelihoods. And not just the unions, but all of this that we're talking about. How did they survive? And then you start thinking about, well, were they miserable people? Deprived? I don't think so. They had food, and then they had this culture and things, So now you think about how we live life these days. I mean, we're not deprived, but we're probably much more miserable as a society than we were.
I saw what happened, And these small activities, like that's, part of this history, I shouldn't butt in, Valerie, I always do. But I mean, because I had more on this write-up, but they did all these activities at Wainola Hall. My mother's family, I'm sure the Natties did too. But they were very active there with plays and music, the whole 9 yards. And plus, in that time, then doing all these chores. I mean, the energy level they had. But then they did all this stuff. But then they also had fun.
Exactly.
They also had fun and enjoyed themselves.
And apparently even the quarry workers would work all day and then go and practice for the play that night.
Exactly. Yeah.
How did they have that energy?
I know.
But then the whole story of what ended this, so that we don't even have these memories unless we really probe for them. What Les has said is, Peter Parsons is the one who told me some years ago that pasteurization was what killed this, is that you could not afford with these small dairy farms to pay for the equipment to be able to sell that milk. And so that's where the concentration in the dairy industry took place, the big farms took place. But Les added in there, which a little bit some of the stories were being told, is that the kids growing up didn't want to do this work. And a lot of them had gone off to the war, according to Les. And then, or they went to college, and so the next generations were ascending into the larger American economy and going off to war, going off are looking for different careers, and somebody, Brett, did you bring this up? That it's like one left in the family who has the slightest interest to take on the family.
Right. As Sandra said that, of all the Seppala children, I think there were 11 or 12, a good number, mostly boys. Only Robert, she said in the interview, only Robert was interested, and he was one of the, if not the youngest, near to being the youngest. And unfortunately, he lost his life, I think, in the war.
Oh, I didn't
And
know
so
that.
therefore,
Yeah.
and also the, let's see who this, Seppala's, Mr. Seppala died in 1942. And so then everything started to be sold off. And Sandra had mentioned that the cows were sold off to Dr. Babson in Riverdale. You remember? The Babson farm. Yeah, yeah.
So, but the other thing that we talked about is that you know, what we've all said, it's just incredible. We still have the chance to look back and grasp this and document it and understand it all in context, because it was an incredibly special era. But now what's interesting is that it's all the rage to have self-sufficiency in farming and small farms. And, you know, so we have backyard growers and all that stuff as if it's some new invention.
Right.
Like, who knows? I should call in the phone and say, did you know that Lanesville was peppered with grow your own food and barter and sell it? And it's healthy, by the way. Healthy, local, and the blueberry picking and all of that. So it's echoing in a very popular sort of.
I also read in an old newspaper that I found in the Sawyer Free Library that one of the reasons why many of the Lanesville Finns had this land still available was because it was considered not to be arable, that it was, you know, too barren, the cliffs, the granite underpinnings of the soil just could not promote agriculture. But of course, the Finnish people were used to that, where they came from. So you see, so they found that, oh, we can grow our crops here, we can have farms here, whereas other people had overlooked it.
Well, and I marveled that behind my house, which is middle of there, you know, there is such rich soil there. And if you farm with animals, you build up healthy soils. And they must, as you said, they must have known from Finland. So, yeah, anyway.
Right, one thing I think about is that you're talking about how the Finns made things work, even though there was odds were, in terms of growing and such, it just wasn't a lot of arable soil. But think of the concept of the immigrants coming here, and they owned property. What a different concept from in Finland. I think it was primogeniture. You know, a lot of the oldest son would inherit everything. And so the second and third and fourth son would just out of everything. And then there came the invitation to work in the quarries and such, and they owned their own land. Can you imagine what a concept that is for many of the Finns who were tenant farmers, working someone else's property? So anyway, we have Edwin here, and I'm wondering if there are questions you might want to ask of him about Lanesville, and it doesn't have to be about farms, but anything that, I mean, because...
If there's any question, you'll have to hear it, because I can't hear anything.
Okay, I'll do that. I should have brought my hearing aids and given them.
No, they're clear up, once I'm outdoors or outdoors.
Okay, Wally?
Ask him what he knows about Folly Cove, Calf's Hole.
Okay. Wally wants to know, do you know anything about Folly Point, Calves Hole? Calves Hole.
Why they named it that?
Yeah, Calves Hole. That's where you got Folly Bay. If you're on the land, you're going out. On the left, there was actually a hole, that's what they called it. But I can't remember why, it had to be something to do with the calf.
A cow went in there.
But all
They had
I,
to get it out.
Yeah.
all I saw in it one time is a lot of fish that were caught in there.
Well, I think
A lot of
came
mackerel
down
that
in there.
had been swimming and they got caught in that, then they get out. But they call it casserole.
Right. Sandra did say that it was one of the cephalous cows or calves that fell in there. And she also said, for some of us around in the 50s and earlier, there used to be an AR and an ER on the left-hand side. One was for Ani Ronka, and I don't know who the other, whoever begins with an E. Enzio Ronka. And so they'd come and they'd refresh it every year when they come here. And remember the word Fritz? Remember there was the word Fritz. Well, they painted that too. And she, I don't know which brother saw her, but she was a model, and so he must have had a shine on whoever that person was, Fritz. Do you have a different story, or do you know about that? Fritz, on Folly Cove, there was the word Fritz, F-R-I-T-Z. No, okay, and so that's what she related to. Right. My favorite non-farm
But
is
how
about...
did the car fall in that hole?
It's big, it's deep.
In other words, they must have escaped on the
Right.
field and gone up on the side, because that's all open there. And then it's very sandy and slippery, and it wouldn't take much to actually, anybody could have fallen off that and gone right into that hole.
That's good. Okay, right.
I was curious, if anyone remembers when young, how often would he or people go into Gloucester? Was that, my grandfather said that was a big trip,
Raymond would like to know, the Lanesville Finns, how often did they go into Gloucester?
Or did he?
Well, they did go to Gloucester, from what I heard, is when there was nothing to do. They said, let's go to Bayview and fight with the Italians or whatever they were, just for entertainment.
But about in your mother and father's era, did they run to Gloucester all the time?
No.
No. And how is it that Lanesville was self-sufficient? We know in terms of food.
Everything was there. And there used to be the Globe tea truck that come around every week. And you could buy different things from them, clothes or that, and if they didn't have it, you ordered it, next week he'll bring it. So you could get just about anything you wanted. And there were stores, there were 3 stores. There was doctors, 2 doctors. So, and the post office. Fish markets down the cove. I mean, it had everything.
Entertainment too, those places.
Gloucester needed us more than we needed them.
Well, myself growing up, in the 40s and 50s, I mean, for me, even going into downtown Gloucester, that was a big deal. I mean, I used to run around Lanesville all summer, like barefoot. I don't think I ever wore shoes.
Right.
And then the bus used to go every half hour
Right.
when I was growing up. And I grew up at 1102 Washington Street, so we'd just run down the bottom of the hill and catch the bus there. But that's the only time I really remember going to like Lawson Shoe Store or whatever and buying shoes and school clothes or whatever. I mean, it was very seldom. I personally, as a child, went into downtown.
Oh, Betty, I was going to call on you next because I remember. I hadn't forgotten.
My mother, Rachel Jacobson, who was born in Lakesville, always told the story of never leaving Lakesville until she was 12 years of age. And she went to Gloucester the first time at that age, and she thought she was in a big city.
Yeah.
But even in my generation, we didn't know anybody in Pigeon Cove. We lived in Pigeon Cove. We didn't know anybody who would be our future classmates in Rockport in the 7th grade. And we were scared to death. We thought, oh my gosh, we hope those kids don't know more than what we know or whatever. And so they were meeting them for the first time. And even John lived way up at the end of High Street. He never met Don Oyentakanen, who lives at, I don't know, number 71 High Street, until further first grade because he stayed up there with his cousins.
So many of them.
Yeah.
Enough of them.
So our lives were circumscribed, but who knew it?
Yeah, so I remember the same thing, Betty, like, we went to Lane School through 6th grade. John was in my class, and Donnie also, but I can remember having butterflies in my stomach. We waited for the bus right down at the bottom of my hill. That's where I waited, where Monroe lived, and there used to be the post office at that time. But I can remember sitting there with butterflies in my stomach, so nervous to go to Central Grammar to go to the 7th grade and get all these, strangers and whatever. And man, this is a horrible thing to say, but I mean, we all had our own neighborhoods, and I know there were people that were afraid of the fence because of knives and stuff like that. I was afraid of Italians. That's how I felt. I was going to be afraid of Italians because I kept hearing stories like about down the fort, and it was, dangerous and all that. And I mean, it's just, I guess, it was the way it was at that time. Yeah.
Well, they closed the school, you didn't get the 7th and 8th.
No, not in that time. But you went to, how many grades did you go?
The 8th grade.
And one class per grade?
And we went to high school. We were the first to graduate out of high school.
The new one?
The new one, yeah.
The new one, 1939.
Yeah, because we went through 6th grade at Lane School, and then 7th and 8th at Central Grammar. Yeah.
Because the Bradstreet School had 3 grades together, and then I don't know if it was 4th or 5th grade that they sent all of us to Lane School.
Yeah, I think it was 5th grade, because I think where the line changed or something, because Lane School probably went to like the Rockport line, I think. And then the Bayview kids. Yeah. And then,
that went with me, they lived in Lanesville.
Yeah.
There were 13 of us in our class.
okay, and then, as Mary was saying, then I can remember because it was 5th grade. We were going into 5th grade, and we were all upset, like saying, "Oh no, the Bayview kids are coming. The Bayview kids are coming." Because
You were so lucky.
I know, and then it ended up, most of my friends ended up being the Bayview girls, but it was really fun. It's just still another one of those things that, because they changed the line, they extended the line further, whatever.
I don't know, I think Bradstreet School closed.
Yeah, that's why.
Oh, is that what happened? Oh,
The dividing line between it, you probably don't remember, but the brook ran down through the middle of Plum Cove.
That's right.
Okay.
It was on the opposite, the Bayview side.
The Bayview side, yeah.
Right, and then they moved the brook all over it is now.
Yeah, because now when I go down to Plum Cove, I sit on the Bayview side.
And I sit on the Lanesville side.
Going on the Bayview bumps.
The Bayview bumps, yeah.
My sister's 90, so she said that, and she grew up in Bayview too, but she said that like they would go over to, I guess it was Foster's, there was an ice cream store there in the summer, and the Lanesville kids were so awful to them. She said, I don't even know why we did that. Yeah, she said they were horrible. They would chase us.
Oh my God.
Yeah, strangers.
Yeah.
So this question I was going to ask you, Nancy, but you remember in your family whether there were always all these newspapers around. This came up last time we met, is that it was not only insular neighborhood, but even by street it was insular. But you might think then that these were very uneducated and disconnected. But actually, my impression is from the plays they did, and those halls, they had lectures coming in all the time, and they were reading, and it's considered that the most educated immigrants who came in those big ways were Finns, because in the churches, to be a member, you had to go through at least 2nd grade. So when they arrived, they were literate. So I had sort of an image of, they were out here and didn't connect to the larger Gloucester, but they were actually connected through the newspapers and the traveling speakers and the kinds of cultural things that they did. And then, you mentioned Quincy, some of the musicians, they would go and play in bands together and competitions and basketball teams. So there's some interesting combination. they were very worldly in their own way, but then also very insular here. So that made, you know?
Sure.
Yeah, because my mother, not just my mother, but I mean, I have pictures, there's whole groups of like, there were choirs, and, you know, this is like, not my grandparents, but my mother's. I mean, my mother was born in 1918, so I mean, but they used to go, say, Quincy, Peabody, they like all over, like Steve, is it?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. But they used to go all over. I have pictures of them. Even one of them says Cape Cod, like 1930 something, and they used to go all over. And the different choirs, I'm sure, came to Lanesville too. And baseball teams. My father was on baseball, played baseball, so there were baseball teams, just like what you just said.
Wally has a lot of that in his interview. You know, we interviewed Wally, and it's transcribed now. But he talked about the baseball on Plum Cove.
Well, I gave you a copy of the 48 pages. I wrote 1 square mile.
Yeah. Oh yeah, right.
Plum Cove, and it goes to the Valley Cove line, and it goes inland on both sides. It starts out of the. Used to be that Whitey would come on the beach in Plum Cove and pick them up on the sand. We had a bicycle. We had a diver's helmet made out of a hot water tank with a bicycle pump. So it starts that way, and it goes all the way through Lanesville and through all of the stores and stuff like that. And it talks about the 6 farms, the 4 grocery stores, the 2 doctors, and all of that. Another one I have, which I didn't, we're going to find, but another time we can come back on. It's an area that it starts out, and I'll only read you a couple of lines here because we're running out of time. Yeah, but in this one, my sister wrote it. She took a workshop, a writing course in San Diego, and it said "Remembering the NAMI Family History," and it's by my sister in 2012. But it starts really. It's how it all began here. You know, it's Cape Ann, Mass. is an island 35 miles up the North Shore from Boston. Cape Ann is almost all granite running down hundreds of feet into the earth. The tests have proven that this granite is the strongest in New England, perhaps in the world. By the beginning of the 19th century, the first granite quarries were developed. By 1872, the Rockport Granite Company was being shipped to cities and towns throughout the east coast of the United States. But anyhow, it's that thing, so it goes all the way through, and how the Finns came over by boat, and like in my grandfather's case, it was in the steerage section, which is that's where the bottom of the boat is. So, but it really starts out how we get to the farms. Okay, so it's kind of a beginning right now. But she wrote each passenger was supplied with a fork, spoon, and a 10-lunch pail. A typical breakfast was coffee and a biscuit. For dinner, the passengers ate soup and 1 dish without meat every 2 days. Anyhow, it's a whole kind of a thing that it leads up to getting here.
Right.
And I think it was kind of significant, you know. But that will be another time.
Sure.
The meetings that we needed. But I brought it because I didn't really know what the conversation was going to be.
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
Other than the farms. Right. You know. Anyhow. It's sort of an interesting story, so people may have a lot of the history of how the people came over in the boat. And it talks about where they landed, you know, in New York and stuff like that. And anyhow, let's see, it finally ends like the end of it. It says, the pumps have been turned off and the quarries are filled with water. During the summer, it is peaceful with people swimming in the winter, children skating below the surface. Abandoned derrick trucks, cables, blacksmith shops remain. Then she says, I want to thank my brother for his moral support to continue whenever he felt like she scrapped the project.
Right.
But it's kind of an interesting story of, you know, that kind of that window of opportunity. But I think we'll make a copy of it, you know, Rob can have that in there.
Good. And this brings up a point too. Yeah. This brings up a point too is, there's a lot of incidental information here, and if we didn't say it today, it would never have been said or recorded. And so, in terms of Cape Ann Finns, it would be so helpful if, like, each of us here reached out to another Finn that we know that may be a member or not. And that everyone seems to, not everyone, it seems as if people say, well, I don't have anything like that, you know, because we think of something, it has to be something grand. And what we're trying to do is capture the life of the everyday Finn here. Because Sylvester Aho is well remembered, and of course Barbara Urkeler is well remembered, and thankfully she wrote so much about us. And so it's not that we don't want to know, but there's so much in another level that we want to capture, and that's our purpose. But we do need to have a few more people, you know, willing to just either give information themselves or talk to another person. Let's talk about blah, blah, blah. And even if it's that person's life, it doesn't have to be that they remembered a parent or grandparent's lives. We can, you know, pull this all together. I'm kind of leaving with the notion is that I always thought that people, the farmers, they had to all begin as quarrymen, but the quarries closed and they had to do something else. But that's not true. No, some people did, but some did not. They came here for that purpose, because that's what they knew, I assume, in the old country. So that was a learning, has been a learning experience for me. And this is completely anecdotal now, or I'm jumping back to the Dan Natty farm now, and that is that Ellie talked about, you know, if you saw the photo of the house, it was a small house and they had a bunch of kids. And so the Natty property went this way, and Ellie's family, Ellie Stefanio's family, had a piece of property this way. Mm-hmm. So she could run right out, as she mentioned, and go right to the Aggie and Nissa's house. But along the way were all these huts. And I remember Aino Natty's hut. They're kind of just makeshift, buildings. And Ellie said, well, they were there because there were so many kids and we were going to sleep them all. And so as the guys got older, they made themselves a hut. And that's where they, spent their time, I assume, until the cold, I'm sure they had potbellies, I'm guessing at that. And that was an interesting piece, because another one who had that hut was Ralph Woodbury. Remember, he used to have his own quarters, and it was tar papered, and it was really something, but they liked their, not isolation, but independence and freedom. Anything else for the good of the order? Thank you.
Well, can I just say that just like local food, there's this whole tiny house.
Yeah, that's right.
It's like we want to live in a really small place.
Right, and I think that's happening in many places.
We're circling around.
Yeah.
One more thing when you said that, because I can remember my Uncle Aino, he lived in there. I can remember when I was growing up. He lived in there, and I think he did our work. It was down the back, way down the back on the right-hand side of the property. But then, right next to the Stefanio property, where Ellie grew up, there was another place, and because I used to go up there to sleepover sometime with my cousins, and I remember it was a place that my Uncle Ted used to come to. I don't think he was living at home, he might have been in the service, but when he came home or something, I think he used to stay in there. So yeah.
Everyone was a problem solver.
Right,
they found
exactly.
answers to issues at hand. It seemed like with not a whole lot of thought, they just do what we have to do. Is there anything else for the good of the order? Anyone have a comment or observation to make? Yes?
I do. I married Edwin 40 years ago, and I didn't know what I was marrying into when I met him. But now, listening to people talk, I know that the Finns had such fortuitousness that they came here not just to do the quarries, but to farm. Because he can make any ground yield. Any ground, anywhere, wherever we go on.
She's paying you compliments.
That must be Finnish because it's nothing, I never could understand it. I said, even the landlord, our landlord doesn't understand what he's done. And he did it everywhere. And he won prizes at the Topsfield Fair for it, so many ribbons that I had to throw them away finally. But now I understand that must be anywhere.
That wasn't a compliment.
The vegetables and things you could grow and you could make anything grow and you want to
I've never seen
want ribbons at
anything.
Topsfield Fair?
No, I didn't, she did go to
Like, great.
but that's not a good one.
We all think it that way. Now, our next session is October 23rd, and we'll combine our annual meeting with that event. And we're tossing around the possible topic of what did the Finns do after the quarries closed? Everyone still had to work. And then also you throw in the Depression. You know, what was happening to immigrant grandparents and sometimes great-grandparents? What did they do? And it seems an interesting kind of path to take, because when you think that everything closed in 29, and there was some, I guess, still open, but it was, you know, essentially gone, they still had to work. And what is it that happened? Yes?
I don't know what year it was, but my Aunt Amy said that my grandfather used to walk across the Cape to help construct Thatcher Road when it was built.
See, those kinds of things are really important, because we have a lot of accomplished people. I mean, there are masons and carpenters and electricians and plumbers. That's probably more our parents' generation. But what were the older ones doing too, or what might we have been told in story? Thanks so much. Is there anything you want to add? No? Thank you so much for attending, and Nancy, and all of you.